The following is a PragProg hero's journey with Bruce Tate, recorded in April 2020, presented by the Pragmatic Bookshelf, home of timely, practical books on classic and cutting-edge topics. Find us online at pragprog.com and everywhere the finest tech books are sold.
So welcome everyone tuning into this recording of the PragProg Hero's Journey, where we sit down with some of the most interesting and most influential authors in tech publishing to find out how they got where they are and why they do what they do and what advice they give to the next generation of up-and-coming tech authors. And today we're talking with software developer, manager, consultant, author, and series editor Bruce Tate. So Bruce, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thanks for having me on. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I know you have a very, very interesting story, and I can't wait to share it with everybody. And so what I'd like to do is start, all the way back at the beginning of your journey as an author. So let's go back in time and before all the social distancing and everything else, and let's talk about what I think was your very first book, which is Comprehensive Database Performance back in 1992. How did you get to that book? How did that book happen?
Yeah, so let's go way back before that. I was an intern at IBM. And, this was the time in the industry when IBM was just held in deep mystique for me. And at the time, they would basically say, hey, these are the top resumes, and we'll take the top 3 or 4 from this stack of 100 and let the industry fight over the rest, right? So they believed that they were getting the best of the best. I fooled them, right? And so over time at IBM, I started moving quickly between the lab setting, where I would write on the database engine or the database front end called Query Manager at the time, and a customer setting. And as I started moving back and forth, I started to find that there was this dearth of information about practically how you tune this mega powerful engine that had 6,000 knobs and levers and absolutely no hint as to what to do with that. So I fancied myself as a great communicator and author. And at the time, there was this IBM internal group called IBM Mechanicsburg, which they basically were a Virginia office, and they would basically, if you found a publisher and you got published, they would put it on Mechanicsburg, where the IBM people could download it for free, so you had built-in sales. So I wrote this book, Comprehensive Database Performance for OS/2's Extended Services. How's that for a pragmatic title? So yeah, I wrote it and was able to interview a lot of developers along the way. And it wasn't a great book. It had great sales because, people at IBM could download it for free, and, they would go on their green screens and type number 4, enter, and then, Bruce Tate was downloaded to their desktop.
So that's interesting. Okay, so for you, for that, it was 2 things. It was just the idea that you already thought, well, I can write. I'm a good writer. You were doing this, the work professionally anyway, and you knew you had a built-in audience. So you thought, why not? What's there to lose? Which makes a lot of sense, right? It's still a big undertaking. It's still a huge thing to go, and so I guess really my question is, did you realize it would be a big undertaking before you set out to do it? Or did you just think, well, let's give it a shot?
Yeah, so the first book that I did was, I think I got 8% royalty for that book. And I think that I was working with a publisher that was Van Nostrand Reinhold, somebody like that. So they didn't give me a lot of guidance along the way, which meant that I didn't really have to give them very much. I think that they knew, much like I knew, that the people that were going to buy this book were IBMers. And so it wasn't this great oppressive process. It wasn't this crucible of ideas. It was basically, you write this thing and we'll run it through our spell check, right? And out comes a pretty decent book. But I did have pretty good peer review based on my network at IBM. I knew a lot of customers and I knew a lot of developers, and I knew some of the main people that were working on the optimizer. We were in the same building, so I could walk over and plop this big old fat manuscript, and these were all nerds, and they were saying, "Ooh, something to read," and and they'd kind of help me along in my career. So I would say probably the most important thing was having that network.
Yeah.
Not knowing tons of people, but knowing the right people that were interested in assisting in my career.
And that makes sense. So you were in a pretty, I'm going to say, specific spot. Like most of the other authors I've talked with have not had that setup leading to the first book. So I imagine that, so Bitter Java is your first then book that isn't like that, right? That's the next book that you wrote. For Bitter Java, you didn't have the built-in audience. You went with the traditional publisher that was going to have to do all the marketing, have to do all the other stuff. So my first question is, why that topic at all? How did you go from, okay, yeah, so I wrote this one book and comprehensive database performance, it did well, it had the built-in audience. Let's try to take this to the general public. Let's try to go outside of IBM and do a different book.
Yeah, so this is interesting. A little embarrassing, but kind of cool in the same way. This book, which I do not consider a good book, I don't even consider a mediocre book.
Okay.
But you may not know it, but for 1 hour, this book, according to Amazon, was the number 7 book in the land.
Wow, no, I did not know that.
For 1 hour, between John Grisham and Stephen Hawking.
It's a good spot to be.
Yes. So it got slash dotted, right? And so it got slash dotted actually before it got sold. So people could speculate on this title, right? Yeah. So Bitter Java, Bruce Tate is going to stick it to the man, right? And so people started talking about what this book was going to say. I wasn't even on slash dot. I didn't even know that it existed at this point. And I had just been laid off. I said, well, I'm this great writer, right? Because I've not just had comprehensive database performance. I also wrote objects for OS2. And I didn't know it, that these things were just 100% being carried by this IBM bureaucracy,
Yeah.
And, oh, it's free. I know that guy. I'll buy, and it would come, and, the book would come, and, many times never get unwrapped or whatever. And, I would write about these esoteric topics and people would buy. But this was one of those books where one of the things that the book taught me to do well is to kind of find learning channels and explore those channels. And so the publisher there was Manning Publications, and they were really excellent. I worked with a guy named Marian Bache, and we had a lot in common, but he would beat on me relentlessly, right? So I had these stories that were, I said, if we're going to do this topic, and he says, I love the topic of Bitter Java. That's a great brand. And I hate it too, right? Because it's a bad way to teach, right? Teaching by counterexample is, I would not recommend that to anyone. But what I did learn was the ability to relate to people through stories. And that kind of became what I could do. So now I don't tell as many of the stories I probably should. 7 languages in 7 weeks, had to move people quickly between languages. And you can't just turn the page, you also need to turn the page in their brain. So what we did in that book is we had these metaphors for movie characters, right? And this idea is not really popular in our publishing world, right? It's additional risk that people believe that you don't have to have.
Yeah.
But I believe that when you inject a personality in the book, you're also opening learning channels. You're also, when done correctly, this kind of idea allows people to make mental connections that they wouldn't necessarily make, right? So that's why Bitter Java talked about extreme sports stories gone bad, right? It's like, ooh, this time that I went up the mountain on my mountain bike and stepped down about 3 inches from a rattlesnake's nose and he didn't bite me, right? So, you put somebody's brain in a different place. And then you could say, okay, this anti-pattern that we're teaching is hidden, it's sudden, and all those things are teaching at the same time. And so that's kind of what I learned about that book. The idea that learning is more than technical details. At the Pragmatic Press, we have this hero's journey, right? So that's important, right? It's important to be relatable and practical. Well, another thing that's important is to actually open learning channels that you wouldn't necessarily open, right? And writing metaphors is really, really important.
So, but this is something, you didn't go into Bitter Java knowing this, right? You went into Bitter Java going, I'm going to write about this topic. Well, actually, why were you writing about that topic at all? How did you choose the topic to even do this book? I hear what you're saying about what you learned, and that's fantastic. Yeah. But for one step back, how did you choose this topic? How did you decide to do this?
Yeah, so at the time, IBM was having trouble. Basically, we had this thing called OS2, which was an operating system, which not many people bought. People bought this other, fledgling operating system called Windows. This was when that steamroller kind of got rolling, probably because our product was not what it should have been. But IBM's move was to say, hey, I'm going to build a sales team. And I'm not going to call it a sales team. I'm going to call it a solutions team. And we're going to move you off of OS2 and onto browser standards. And then if you're running on Microsoft Windows, we don't care. We still control the standards, or at least the standards that you're writing to are open. And so you can continue to buy IBM hardware. And so having that experience, I basically left IBM, joined a startup that immediately blew up like in 4 months. And then I said, I've got to do something. And I think that writing will help me establish a career. And it did, right? So I was looking for something that was catchy. So I started with a brand, right? So the Bitter Java brand sounded relevant, it sounded important, and it didn't sound like the other titles that were out there, right? It's Explorer, I guess it was Mastering EJBs was Ed Roman's book, and then Effective Java was Bruce Eccles' book. So there were a lot of books like that with 2-word titles with one kind of some type of learning. I said, what about Bitter Java? And knowing me, it's not a bitter book, right? It's learning through Antio patterns, which is a terrible way to learn, right? You don't learn by counterexamples. You learn by trying to do the right thing and then doing the right thing, and then you can talk about the traps along the way. But that was the idea anyway.
So for young authors, new authors, people who haven't written before, something I want to point out that you're saying that really a lot of other authors haven't talked about with me, but I think is incredibly smart, is that in both cases now, so both with Comprehensive Database Performance, I'm assuming with the later OS2 book, and then with Bitter Java, in each of those cases, you were thinking about it as a product to sell, as well as you were like, I have information I want to share, I want to teach people. You talked about learning channels, but I think it's incredibly important that you also were thinking about it as a product that's going to sell. So in the one case, it was like, I have a built-in audience. And with Bitter Java, you're already thinking about like, look, this is how I'm going to stand out in the marketplace. Because I think that's something people forget a lot, especially with their first book, is the idea of how do you stand out in the marketplace. Yes, all the authors have a story to tell, they have information to share, but it also is a product that needs to sell. There's a business component to it. And I think it's incredibly smart that you did that. And then you come along just a couple years later, you do Better, Faster, Lighter Java, you win a Jolt Award for it, So at that point, were you just building on, for that book, did you get to that book by going, oh, I'm building on the success that I'm kind of already have going? What made you decide to write this book?
Okay, so there's another couple of people that you've interviewed that are really important to me. You've interviewed Venkat Subramaniam and also Brian Hogan. So I was working with Brian Hogan, where he was a customer, and I was a consultant that was coming in. And one of the Java engagement that I did before his, we basically were asked. We said, we have this new group of developers. They're COBOL developers.
Oh,
I want you to give me the stack of lessons. Give me 2 or 3 classes in Java that describe what you're going to have to learn. Right? So then I started building this stack in my head.
Yeah.
All right. So the ultimate end goal was the application, and that was written on this servlet layer, which you had to know this kind of web server layer.
Mm-hmm.
Then sitting underneath that was, the language layer. So now that we can start to talk about language, then there's the Java layer, which you had to know object-oriented development. So we're up to like 5 or 6 concepts now. Then the EJBs, and each part of EJBs had its own kind of theory and coding philosophy around it. So I had this stack of books that was like 12 high. And then I was asked to build 3 courses around that to show them how to do the work.
Yeah.
So actually at that point, I was solving a problem, right? So my best books have all come from 2 things. First, I'm trying to solve a problem for myself.
Okay.
And there's a brand. So the brand is really, really important. So as I usually wrote as a consultant, right? So as a consultant, I said, well, I'm not going to compromise on my rates, right? I believe that I'm worth this. So what I'll do is I'll build scarcity in the market, right? And the other thing that I'll do is build my brand, right? So it's a built-in marketing. So when you don't have enough marketing, you're not getting enough gigs. You start working on a book. You work on a book. You make a little money. I mean, not that much these days, frankly, since Amazon was created. It's the bottom fell out for others, but it has been pretty lucrative for me in terms of selling the consultancy engagements. But that only works because I think about it in terms of a brand. Yeah. If you don't think about it in terms of a brand, then writing can't really help you. You can't. You don't have there's nothing more lonely or more miserable than putting in a lot of work that not a lot of people get to see.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, luckily for you, your books do really well. You've had a lot of people take a look at your books. And, kind of talking about the writing, let's talk about that part of it, because we talked about how you got your ideas. We talked about some of the early books that you did, but let's talk about the writing itself. I guess we might as well just go back to Bitter Java, because now
let's go after Bitter Java, because I think that I've learned since then. I mean, I know you want to kind of get into my head as a young writer.
Yeah.
I wasn't really a very good writer then, and that's okay, right? But I'd really like to talk about the book, The 7 Languages in 7 Weeks, because I think that I basically started over as a writer at that point.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's a good story. I think that if I were to guide someone, if I were to guide a young Bruce Tate, that's where I would go first.
Okay, so let's talk about that. At that point, especially, you have some writing. Certainly you've written books, but what changes for you there? What's different about that book? And let's talk about what was difficult about it and how you got around it.
Okay, so I think that let's talk about 4 ingredients. The first one is self-belief. You cannot write a book without self-belief. I always tell my daughters the difference between being a traveler and not being a traveler. Traveler is not money. It's how you see yourself. Travelers see themselves as travelers. Successful people in their profession aren't the people with the best grades at the best universities. They're the people who believe that they're successful and love what they do. So the first thing is self-belief. The second thing is a personal passion, because when you write a book, it's a massive commitment, and you can't be as diligent as you need to be and stay as passionate as you need to if you're really not into it, right? So I guess the second thing is, the second ingredient is joy.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes out as a personal passion, and people can tell when you believe in yourself, and when you believe in what you're telling people, and when you enjoy it.
Yeah.
That really comes out. There's a video that's coming out, or that's out right now, by a guy named Chris McCord. He's a good friend, co-author, super nice guy, the creator of the Phoenix framework.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout this book, not the book, throughout this video, it's just 15 minutes long. You could see his face light up, even though his face is not on the screen. You could hear him laugh.
Yeah.
You believe him, and you want to use his technology. And books are like that. The laughter comes through, and the passion comes through in the words.
Yeah.
So the third thing is that you have to have a partner. There's this big movement out there to be a self-publisher. And I don't think that that's such a great movement right now, because it basically, it's the same thing that's wrong with the news cycle right now. Whichever side you believe on, there is so much out there. There's so much unverified news out there that it's kind of it's a bad thing, right? So the quality of the quality that we're consuming, and publishing this is the same way, right? So the quality that we're consuming, we're willing to trade volume for quality, and that's not a good trade. That's very rarely a good trade for developers or for the authors. It just isn't. So you need a partner, and for me, the partner was there's Dave and Andy here at the Pragmatic bookshelf, but also very much my editor. Kind of, as my author, she's my conscience, right? She's the person that can basically, that can gently pull me aside. And it's a really hard thing to give an editor advice, but she can pull me aside and say, this isn't working, and we need to move on to this, and you need to have more detail here. Bruce, you're a good writer, but this page is not good writing, right? You really need that. And so when you have those three ingredients, right, you have the self-belief and the personal passion, and you have the partner, then the fourth thing can matter. Then you have to have an idea. And the idea can't be something random. It has to be something that's related to something that you really want to know. So my best books, I've got a lot of books about products that I think will be successful. Those books are usually not the most successful. My most successful books are books that I wrote because I was afraid, books that I wrote because I really wanted to know something, books that I wrote because I wanted to be, I liked the people that I was writing the book with, right? So, the Programming Phoenix, basically because how can you have a bad time with Jose Valum or Chris McCord? The 7 languages in 7 weeks, I was just terrified. But those 4 things are really, really the secret ingredient.
So I want to come back to all of that because I have notes on all that too. And you said so many interesting things. Let's start though with the idea of having a partner to write with, for 2 reasons. One is, let's start with the idea of a partner as a co-author, because this is something I noticed when I look through your collection of books, your body of work. You have a lot more co-authors than a lot of other authors do. And I think a lot of authors are actually afraid, especially new authors. They're very afraid a co-author means that their voice won't be heard, right? They're thinking about, I'm doing a book, maybe it's even my second book. I'm so afraid if I bring a co-author in, or sometimes you even have someone listed as a contributor, not a full co-author, but they contributed a significant amount. When do you think it's a good idea, and when do you think it's a bad idea for an author to have co-authors on a book with them?
So I'm lucky. Maybe lucky, maybe easy to work with. I think lucky. I have had some very good friends that I was able to write with. Sometimes writing a book can stress a relationship. It's important to understand that. But I think that the most important thing about using a co-author is understanding roles. So for me, it's often very difficult to shift context. So if someone can code a book, and somebody can write alongside that, I think that that's a pretty good model. So it's almost like when you get out there and you try to describe this process to other people, some people kind of want to be the voice, right? They want to show, I can code, I want to show that I can write. And then you have the problem of kind of marrying the voices together and marrying the coding standards and style together. But I think that that when I can basically sit down and write, like for example, I wrote a book with James Gray, who's one of my best friends, one of the smartest men I've ever known, and he's a brilliant coder. And when he's really, really passionate about something, sometimes he can write, but sometimes it's too much for him to control, right? So he has a sentence with like 19 parentheticals, and it's hard for him to trim. But when he can dump down his brilliance and code up his brilliance, and then James Gray comes through. So he basically needs a gardener for all those concepts. And so we work together in that way. With other relationships, I've been the person to code the back end, to code the book or provide the story, or with Ben Marks, I worked with him a lot with Adopting Elixir with Jose Vallon, and he wrote a lot of the core content for Adopting Elixir. Yeah, so I think that if you can really set the roles cleanly, and if you have compatible, so if you decide to write side by side, a lot of people try to work that way. If you can write side by side and code side by side, and you're willing to put in the work to make that stuff marry, then a co-author can be a good idea.
Okay, that's good. It comes up a lot. A lot of times, like I said, with new authors especially, they're afraid of what it means because they think that they're going to get lost in it. But it sounds like there is a formula and there's a way to make that work. And on the same idea of partners, this was something else I was going to ask you about too. Publishers, traditional publishers, self-publishing, that is probably the thing that I hear more often than not from anybody that I talk with who's thinking about writing a book. The first question they have is, why wouldn't I just self-publish? I don't. They look at what they get from, Amazon Kindle publishing, like direct publishing or wherever it is, and they go, I don't get it. I don't get why in 2020 you would ever have to work with, a traditional publisher, but it sounds like you're saying you think that there's the quality issue, potentially. Some of them would say, well, no, my quality would be very good, but what do you think? Is there, let me do the reverse, because you kind of said the one thing. Is there a
we got self-published. Go ahead.
Yeah. That's the question. Is there a time? Is there someone that you would say, yes, you are a good candidate for self-publishing? Go off and do it.
I believe that anyone can self-publish, and I'm sorry I said that on this tape. But do I believe that self-publishing is a good idea? It's usually not, right? It's, can you hire everyone involved to build a new house, right?
Yeah.
And can you get all of the inspections? Can you do everything that's required? Can you hire all the trades to build a new house and save money?
Yeah.
The answer is potentially, right? Potentially. Usually not, right? Usually, if you're saying, okay, you're writing your first book, so you're going to take on the publishing, you're going to take on the marketing, you're going to take on keeping your full-time job. You're going to take on all of the different kinds of editing, the developmental editing to double check the technical ideas, the code, the peer review to find and manage the review, and be strong enough to listen to the advice that you get back, because that's not always easy to do.
Yes,
So
very
all of these things are incredibly difficult to pull off. So, if I'm asked the question, would I self-publish or work with someone else, and that someone else is going to keep 90% of the take, then I would say I'm self-publishing, and I'm going to put my own dream team together.
Yeah.
But if I'm asked if somebody is very fair with the royalty structure, and they let me basically tap into their audience that they've already developed over time, they let me tap into their successful editors that they've kind of worked with over time, if they kind of help me work, help me find my voice, if they help me find courage to take feedback, all those things are tremendously valuable. Mm-hmm. I mean, the one person that I really can't do without today is Jackie Carter. I mean, she's my editor. Gosh, love her to death. Very good friends, but in terms of really being my conscience, she's about as good as there is.
That's so great to hear. I mean, for a lot of reasons, but one reason that I'm happy to hear that is that I think that for new people who haven't written before, they don't know all of those parts you just said. It's one of those cases of where so little, you don't even know what you don't know, right? To them, it's like, well, don't I just sit down and I put the stuff somewhere in some file, I type it in somewhere, and then I hit some button that says publish.
And you can, right? So the scary thing is that you can do all that stuff without, you could say, hey, I'm going to go to stock art, bang, cover. Yeah. Type like 8 words, mix them together. And you could say, hey, I got 3 friends that were English majors. So, I'm covered, bam, edited, right?
Yeah.
And people do, and you can tell the difference, right? So, right now, the scary thing about the technical information that's out there on the internet, it's hard to find the good stuff. Yeah. And, frankly, we as a publishing industry did it to ourselves in some ways by letting some dubious quality get through on topics that we knew could sell.
Yeah.
And there were people that said, hey, we could do this better, so we're going to put our documentation out online, and we're going to use the wisdom of the crowd to make it better. And that's a model that works.
Yeah.
And gosh, that works great if you have like an army of people that'll read it for you and help debug it with you. But it's not for a first book, I would definitely recommend, if you can get a good publisher and actually work with the team and see what's behind producing quality, it's really worth it.
It's that, you called it an army of people, and I like to talk to people as about it's a platform, right? It's that you're not just, the publisher is not just take the file, now take it to printer, right? It's this platform, it's this entire thing. It's all the pieces that come together, like you said.
Platform and process.
Yep. And that's, I think, from my perspective, that's what you get from a publisher. So let me just kind of ask you one final thing here, because you covered so much ground. You talked about some of the stuff that you get out of being an author and how these things relate. But when I look at you, from what I know from the outside, I know you're a software engineer. I know you've been a consultant. You've worked at big companies like IBM. You've worked at startups. You have Groxio, your own company. I mean, you have all these different things, and then somehow you're also an author. How does the authoring part fit into all of that? I know from what you told me in the early days, it was you had a problem at work, and then that kind of translated ultimately to, a book. But how does it all come together now? Do you consider yourself one of those things more than the others, or is it all just you are all of these things, and writing is one part of it all?
Yeah, so Groxio is a company, so I'm going to answer this the long way, right? So Groxio is actually a partnership between the Pragmatic bookshelf and myself. We came together around this company called Groxio. And it's about wanting to be able to write full time, but recognizing that financially, books just aren't as lucrative as they used to be. So needing to do that with a different kind of platform. So right now, I would say that I am a full-time writer, but part of the job is supplementing my writing with video, right? Supplementing my writing with projects, with working on the platform to provide something engaging that people want to, join me with, and be a partner, be a learning partner with me. So yeah, I would say that in terms of writing today, would I manage my career the way I have in the past? I would say I probably would, because in the past, basically what I would say is, hey, this is the Bruce Tate package. And to get this whole package, you're going to have to let me invest in my playtime. And my playtime is writing books. It's playing with new pieces of software. But when you do, you're going to find that playtime is an investment. So I very much see this Groxio package the same way. I get to play with new technologies and new languages sometimes. I get to write about the ones that are most interesting to me. And I get to invite other people that want to say, hey, I want to be knocked down from expert to one and climb that hill with you. And I want to do it over and over again. I want to invest in myself the same way that you invested in yourself. So yeah, I mean, I think that for me, this is my attempt to make writing full-time work for me in 2020, and I think it's working.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Bruce, I can tell you that I hear from our readers, our customers, a lot about your books. They love your books. They learn from you. I know that they are on Groxio. They're interested in everything you're doing. They want to go on the journey with you. So you're doing a fantastic job. And for everyone who might be listening, Bruce is also working on a live view book that's going to come out very soon, and we're extremely excited about that. So thank you for working with us and for all the things you've been doing for all these years.
You're quite welcome.
Thanks, Bruce. Bye.
Take care.
This has been a PragProg Hero's Journey, brought to you by the Pragmatic Bookshelf. For the best in tech book publishing, visit us online at pragprog.com.